Let's start with something you almost certainly believe about yourself. You believe that when a thought pops into your head, you put it there. You believe that when you decide something, you decided it. You believe that the voice narrating your inner life, the one running commentary on everything from what you want for lunch to whether you should quit your job, is you, fully, authentically, freely you. It's a reasonable thing to believe. It feels completely true. It feels so obvious that most people have never once stopped to question it. And that, right there, is exactly the problem. Because here is what the neuroscience actually shows. That thought you just had, the one that felt so spontaneously. Personally, yours was the end product of a biological process that began before you were consciously aware of anything happening at all. Your brain was already building that thought, already assembling its components, already committing to a direction, while the part of you that feels like you was still sitting in the waiting room, completely unaware that any meeting was taking place. You are not the author of your thoughts. You are, at best, the last person to find out about them. Now, before you close the tab in existential protest, stay with this. Because what the science reveals about where thoughts actually come from is not depressing. It is extraordinary. And it changes everything about how you understand yourself, other people, and why human beings do the genuinely baffling things they do. Let's go back to the brain. Not in the abstract, hand-wavy way people usually talk about the brain, but specifically and mechanically, because the mechanism is the whole story. In the 1980s, a neuroscientist named Benjamin Libet ran a series of experiments that quietly detonated a bomb under the concept of conscious agency. He asked participants to sit in front of a clock, flex their wrist whenever they felt like it, and report the position of the clock hand at the moment they first felt the urge to move. Meanwhile, he was recording their brain activity with electroencephalography. What he found was so uncomfortable that neuroscientists spent the next 3 decades arguing about it rather than accepting it. The brain showed electrical activity, a slow build-up called the readiness potential, beginning approximately half a second before the participant reported any conscious awareness of wanting to move. In other words, the brain had already started preparing the action before the person knew they were going to do it. The decision, or whatever we want to call it, was being assembled in neural tissue before it ever surfaced in conscious experience. Half a second doesn't sound like much. But in the context of how we think about free will and conscious choice, it is an enormous gulf. It means the thing you experience as deciding that felt sense of being the originating cause of your own action is arriving after the fact. You are not the conductor of the orchestra. You are an audience member who has convinced yourself that because you can hear the music, you must be making it. Now, subsequent research has refined and complicated the Libet findings. Some researchers argue the readiness potential reflects preparation rather than a committed decision. Others point out that participants could still veto the movement after the unconscious build-up began. The debate is real and ongoing. But the broader point, the one that survives all the methodological arguments, is this. An enormous amount of what produces your thoughts and actions is happening below the level of conscious awareness, in neural circuits you have no direct access to and never asked to be running. So where do thoughts actually come from? Let's build this from the ground up. Your brain contains roughly 86 billion neurons. Each neuron connects to thousands of others. The number of possible synaptic connections in a single human brain exceeds the number of atoms in the observable universe by a margin so large it becomes meaningless to even state it as a number. All of this hardware is running constantly, in parallel, processing information from your body, your senses, your memory systems, and your environment simultaneously, almost none of which ever reaches conscious awareness. Consciousness, it turns out, is not the brain's primary mode of operation. It is more like a press release, a summary, curated and simplified, of decisions and processes that have already largely been made elsewhere. The brain does not think consciously and then act. It acts, and then sometimes produces a conscious narrative to accompany the action. The narrative feels like it came first. It did not. This is not a metaphor. This is the functional architecture of the nervous system. Think about language. When you speak, you do not consciously select each word from a mental dictionary, evaluate its grammatical appropriateness, assign it a phonological structure, and then send motor commands to your larynx. You just talk. The machinery doing all of that work is operating far below the level of your awareness, running processes that took years of development to build, and that you could not consciously access even if you tried. Your conscious experience of speaking is the output. You had almost nothing to do with the production. The same is true of emotional reactions. You see someone who looks vaguely like a person who once hurt you, and before you have consciously registered anything, your amygdala has already flagged the resemblance, activated a low-grade threat response, and begun tilting your body's physiology toward wariness. Cortisol and adrenaline are nudging their way into circulation. Your face has already made a micro-expression you are unaware of. Your posture has shifted imperceptibly. All of this happened in the first fraction of a second of perception. Long before the conscious mind showed up to say, something about this person bothers me, you experienced that thought as an insight. It was actually a readout from a process that was already done. And here is where it gets even more interesting. Because the processes running below conscious awareness are not neutral or random. They are shaped profoundly, specifically, and in ways that differ dramatically from person to person by biology and experience. Take the prefrontal cortex. This is the region of the brain most associated with deliberate, reflective thought. The part that allows you to override impulses, consider consequences, think abstractly, and modulate the emotional noise coming from the amygdala and other subcortical structures. If your prefrontal cortex is well developed and operating well, your conscious thoughts tend to be more measured, more considered, more capable of complexity. If it is not, because of genetics, because of early adversity, because of chronic stress, because of sleep deprivation, because of 1,000 other factors, the thoughts that bubble up into awareness are going to look very different, more reactive, more threat-focused, more dominated by the amygdala's blunt emotional vocabulary. Here is a number worth sitting with. The prefrontal cortex is not fully mature until approximately age 25. Before that point, the circuitry responsible for regulating impulse, weighing long-term consequences, and modulating emotional reactivity is literally still under construction. This is not a personality flaw in young people. It is a developmental biological reality. And yet, as a society, we routinely hold teenagers and young adults to a standard of rational self-governance that their prefrontal cortex is physically not yet equipped to meet. We treat their impulsive, reactive, emotionally flooded thinking as a moral failing. It is, in significant part, a construction schedule. And before you decide that you, as a fully matured adult, are now operating with a pristine and fully autonomous prefrontal cortex, consider what happens to that cortex under stress. Chronic stress, the kind produced by poverty, trauma, unstable relationships, insecure housing, a job you hate, a body that is sick, does measurable structural damage to prefrontal tissue. It reduces gray matter density. It impairs synaptic connectivity. It tips the functional balance of the brain away from reflective thought and toward reactive, threat-based processing. The thoughts that rise into awareness in a chronically stressed brain are not the same thoughts that would rise in a non-stressed one. They are more fearful, more hostile, more short-term, more rigid. So when people in difficult circumstances think in ways that look from the outside, like poor decisions or irrational behavior, what you are often actually seeing is a brain whose prefrontal architecture has been compromised by conditions it never chose. The thought felt freely generated to the person thinking it. It was the output of damaged machinery running on a compromised substrate. Culture adds another layer that is so pervasive it becomes almost invisible. The language you think in shapes the categories available to your mind. Researchers have shown that speakers of languages without words for certain spatial concepts literally perceive space differently than speakers of languages that have them. Your native language is not a neutral medium for preformed thoughts. It is part of the machinery that generates thought in the first place, and you did not choose your language. You were immersed in it before you could evaluate it, before you had any alternative, before you even knew that other options existed. The same is true of the conceptual frameworks absorbed from family, religion, culture, and community. The assumptions baked into the thought before you even begin thinking that this kind of person is trustworthy. that this kind of situation is dangerous, that this kind of outcome is desirable, were installed in neural circuitry during childhood, in a brain that was developmentally incapable of critical evaluation. You are now thinking with those assumptions as infrastructure. They are not conclusions you reached. They are the ground you are standing on while you reach conclusions. This is why two people can look at the same situation and generate radically different thoughts about it without either of them being stupid or dishonest. They are running different software on different hardware shaped by different histories. The thoughts feel equally self-evident to both of them. Neither of them authored the deeper assumptions producing those thoughts. Now here is where people usually get uncomfortable, because the implication seems to be that there is no you at all. That self is an illusion, and human beings are just biological puppets jiggling on evolutionary strings. This is both the obvious conclusion and the wrong one, and it is worth being careful here. The self is real. Your values, your personality, your characteristic ways of engaging with the world. These are genuine features of a genuine individual. The fact that they were shaped by processes you did not consciously control does not make them less yours. Your liver did not choose to be your liver, but it is still doing your digestion. The question is not whether you exist. The question is what kind of existence you actually have, and what kind of authorship is actually possible. What the neuroscience suggests is not that you have no influence over your thoughts, but that the influence is indirect, delayed, and far more limited than the experience of conscious agency implies. You can, over time, change the inputs that shape the machinery. Meditation has been shown to measurably alter prefrontal structure and function. Psychotherapy changes the neural representation of threatening memories. New experiences can gradually update the probabilistic models your brain uses to generate predictions and reactions. None of this is instant. None of it is under direct conscious control, but it is real. The problem is that we have built our entire moral and legal architecture on a story about human thought and behavior that neuroscience is steadily dismantling. We treat people as if their thoughts were fully autonomous productions of a freely choosing inner self, when the evidence increasingly suggests that those thoughts are the outputs of biological systems shaped by factors the person neither chose nor controls. We punish people for thinking wrongly, for wanting badly, for failing to override impulses that their prefrontal architecture was never in a position to override. We congratulate ourselves for thoughts we generated no more freely than the person we are judging generated theirs. And here is the thought that should probably sit with you for a while. The feeling of authorship, that vivid, immediate, convincing sense that you are generating your own mental life from some sovereign inner position, is itself a product of the brain. It is something the brain does. It is not a window onto a deeper truth about agency. It is a story the brain tells, after the fact, to make the outputs of its unconscious processing feel coherent and self-generated. You experience your thoughts as yours because your brain produces an experience of ownership along with the thought itself. The two arrive together, packaged as a unit, and so the ownership feels as real and primary as the thought. But they are both outputs. They are both products. Neither is the originating cause of the other. You are not the author of your thoughts. You are the stage on which they appear, and the playwright, the real playwright, is a few billion neurons, a lifetime of experience, a genome you inherited, a culture you were born into, and an evolutionary history for billion years deep, all of them collaborating on a production you get to watch but were never quite in charge of. Which, when you really sit with it, is either the most terrifying thing you have ever heard, or the most liberating, possibly both, depending, of course, on what kind of brain you happen to be running it through.